Thanks for coming tonight. We have a really good lineup tonight. We've got Senator Brian Birdwell here. We've got Hugh Reynolds, not Hugh Hefner, here to speak to us tonight. And it ought to be a pretty good meeting. I hear that there's been a question and answer with Senator. So let's get started. We'll start with prayer first. Somebody got this out of order. Frank, you want to do the prayer? Yeah, I see your names on here. And then we'll go to the pledge. I changed the order.
I am not Cy Robinson. Would you like that? Let's pray, please. Father, we are thankful that you have been gracious enough to give us life and give us the things necessary to support our lives, and that we were fortunate enough to be born in this country, a country that was based upon principles contained within your word, and principles that gave birth to the concept of freedom and liberty like no other nation in this world has ever seen. We acknowledge, Father, though, that our nation our leaders have strayed from those principles, and we as a people now are really pretty much in rebellion against you. And for that, we ask that you would be patient with us, give us the strength and the dedication to combat these turnings away from you, that we might turn our nation, our neighbors, our friends, our relatives, and our leaders back to a mind frame of keeping you first in their lives and being guided by you and not by their own desires. We pray for our nation, Father. We pray for our children, our grandchildren, and what future they have in store for them. And that is why we ask, Father, your hand of grace and patience be upon us. Encourage and strengthen us, that we might once again be a nation under you. It's our prayer in your Son's name. Amen. Amen.
You will remain standing, please. First pledge, flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
It is truly my honor and privilege to do this introduction. Maggot, dirtbag. 20-year veteran of the United States Army, Lieutenant Colonel, retired. I don't know if any of you do not know Senator Brian Birdwell as a Lieutenant Colonel, on that morning when the expletive-deleted terrorists took airplanes, his short story is, if he wouldn't have been coming back from the bathroom that morning, he wouldn't have a story. The airplane came through his office. That is not his story tonight. But now he is our Texas State Senator. That's all I've really got. in the words of Senator Brian, be brief, be good, be brief, be gone. Yes, and now I introduce Senator Brian Birdwell. Brian Birdwell.
Thank you again for your very kind and gracious introduction, Bill. I was glad you chose maggot or dirtbag as opposed to other things I was called 20-something years ago. Well, they were politically correct, or they were okay back in 1983.
We're going, what's your name? Dean?
Oh, no. I looked at the agenda. Bill gave me the agenda, and I've got about 30 minutes with you tonight. So what I wanted to do was cover some of the major muscle movements from the legislative session that has just occurred. Take 15 minutes, maybe a tad less if I can do it in that short period of time, and then take about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A on issues that are of import to you, whether they're state or others. More than happy to discuss those with you. I did bring my dry erase board in case I need it, depending upon the nature of your questions. This is not going to be a military briefing tonight. I'm not going to draw out diagrams and the like unless, based upon some of the questions that I think I may get in the education or transportation arena, it'll help me explain things that when you start getting the numbers, it's just a lot easier to have them up on a dry erase board than it is to try to talk about. Let me cover the major muscle movements that we've had in the legislative session over the past now 7 months. One of them that we came into to the session with that was absolutely critical to our state is water. Over the past several years, in fact in 1997, with the session that began in 1997, the state water plan was developed by the Texas Water Development Board and was put into writing of here's what the state needs in the way of water for the next 40 years to be able to make sure that we're sustaining business, agriculture, residential, and the like of our water needs of a growing state. That plan was never funded because the plan in its original writing was about $56 billion. $56 billion is 2/3 of the state budget for what we have in the way of state taxes or general revenue. We generally run we're running about $90 billion right now, and when the plan was originally developed back in the mid to late 90s, it was $56 billion. Short of standing up and saying we're not going to do education for 2 years, there's no way to fund the state water plan in one single biennium. Over the years, 97, 99, 2001, 2003, water plan was never funded. And as we've come to the point where Texas is growing, our population has increased dramatically. Let me give you one example. In all the years that Texas and California have been in the Union, this past redistricting year was the first year that California stayed flat in receiving House of Representatives appropriation for additional seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. They are losing population where they are simply trading water. Many of them are coming to Texas. As Governor Perry would say over the last several years, 1,000 people a month are coming into Texas, which is consuming water, making demands on roads, making demands on education, and the like. It's a great problem to have that people want to come to Texas, not only for what's here, but what they're leaving. But it does present unique challenges, and that's the bad news side of the good news story of people wanting to come to Texas. So what we did this go-around is took $2 billion. I'm very cautious in touching the rainy day fund. I know Chairman Dan, you know that the commander always has to maintain a reserve, and he only touches it at the peril of mission accomplishment. Our water circumstance is becoming such a challenge that it will be the reason people leave Texas. It's because we cannot sustain our agriculture, industrial, and residential needs. So we took $2 billion in the rainy day fund, set it aside with a constitutional amendment proposition that you'll have to vote on. The dollars are not appropriated unless the constitutional amendment passes here in the state of Texas. But if the voters approve it, $2 billion will be set aside into what's called a revolving loan fund that the Texas Water Development Board will use to provide loans to local communities to be able to build water projects and then pay back that loan to the state. As an example, in the town of Clifton, in Bosque County, they want to raise their water reservoir 5 feet. The wall that actually holds their water up against one of the terrain features in Bosque County there in Clifton. If they do so, that'll add about 100,000 acre feet of water that when the Lord does send the rain, they can hang on to it, gives them a greater water storage capacity. Those dollars are not going to put water in reservoirs, lakes, and the like. Those dollars are designed that when the Lord does send the rain, we've got greater capacity to capture and hang on to water rather than seeing it flow to the Gulf of Mexico. Keep as much from flowing as we can, so that, like in the 50s, with the drought of the 50s, we built a number of reservoirs in the 60s. But our population has been growing since the 60s, but our ability to stock water has not. The last big reservoir was Richland Chambers back in the early 1990s. That's been 23 years ago. Texas is growing at a faster rate than we are building reservoirs. Thus, the reason for the water development funds that we put together that you will have to approve or disapprove in the coming election of November for constitutional amendments. Budget. I voted for some supplemental spending associated with the budget. When I say supplemental spending, it's not necessarily additional spending, but a supplement to the budget that had some emergency needs in it, some transportation-related items in it. Some of that is all structured around with the nature of what got defeated, why we're in a special session, and I won't bore you with the branches and sequels of how we've gotten to what. There were some good things in the base budget, SB1. I was telling Dan about every session, the budget originates in a different house. In the federal constitution, the budget, all fiduciary items, all begin in the U.S. House of Representatives. In the state constitution, it alternates between the two bodies. This session, it began, started as a Senate bill. Last session, it's a House bill. Next session, it'll be back to a House bill and as it alternates. I did vote against Senate Bill 1, the original budget bill. There were good things in it and there were bad things in it, but from my perspective, the 30,000-foot view, the biggest reason I voted against it was because we were gradually putting so much more money into education, it was costing us the money that we needed to be putting into transportation. We were basically backfilling the $4 billion of stimulus money from 2009 that we received. We were backfilling it, and the problem with that isn't so much the backfill of education is we do not have a standard that says we use baseline budgeting, meaning that whatever we spend in dollars this biennium, we will start with that as the baseline next session. But it's very difficult not to do that for a lot of different reasons. We ought to be doing zero-based budgeting. My concern is that with a $102 billion budget, when we come back in the next session, that will be just generally viewed as, well, this is how much we spent last time. With inflation and population growth, it's always going to go up. Going from 81 billion last session to 102 billion this session. And regardless of the mathematics, having to backfill Medicaid, I won't bore you with all that, the individual machinations that come with percentages and the like. That is a significant amount of spending, particularly when we're putting all of it into education. Education is important. It is the #1 expenditure of the state of Texas, followed closely by Medicaid, and unfortunately Medicaid is rapidly catching education. And that is a dynamic associated with Obamacare that I hope you'll get some discussion tonight from the gentleman that follows me. But that's the reason the state of Texas is so guarded and cautious, not only with Obamacare, but with Medicaid expansion, is because we will be putting Medicaid expenditures on steroids. And the reason we already have our transportation funding problem is so many dollars are going to education and Medicaid. Back in the 1960s, we spent almost 30% of our state budget on transportation. Right now, it's about 7%. Because education and Medicaid, when it was signed in '64, Texas began participating in '66, older population. Education is flattening, Medicaid is rising. And in the next decade to 15 years, we face the prospect that Medicaid will be the #1 expenditure in the state of Texas. That is a very dangerous proposition to be in. Some other areas in the education arena. In the interim between last session and this session, I got to visit with approximately 40 of the 88 school district superintendents that are in Senate District 22. Many of them talked about a number of the things associated with the freedom of maneuver challenges that they have. Testing. How many of you have got kids in school and you see your kid taking 15 tests to get out of high school? I can't tell you how many parents, superintendents talk to me about, we are spending so much time testing. In fact, I went to the little town of Valley Mills, right outside of Waco on Highway 6 as you're heading toward Clifton, Meridian, through Boston County. Sat down with them, the superintendent there, and asked one of his vice principals to pull the calendar in, and he showed me they start testing, essentially shutting school down on April 15th. I thought that was quite apropos. But starting on April 15th for almost a month, they're spending an inordinate amount of time testing. So one of the things we did, under Senator Patrick's leadership as the chair of education, along with the House members, Jimmy Don Aycock as the chair of education on the House side, began looking at ways to stop being so micromanagerial to our school districts. We want to set the box, set the frame that they operate in, and give them and afford them and you, as not only voters of your state legislature, but voters of your school board. When the state legislature becomes the de facto school board for the state, it really does take away your freedom of maneuver as voters in your local school districts to have some say and direction of any rigor in what your school districts are doing. So one of the things that we did in talking with school district, principals, superintendents, is pull down the number of tests required for graduation from 15 to 5. English 1, English 2, Algebra 1, Biology, and United States History are the 5 areas that are tested. And the purposes for testing from the state legislature's perspective is to validate that you are succeeding in your mission. There will be other end-of-course tests, but the state doesn't use those as grades or validation procedures to validate that school districts are meeting the objectives that are set forward by the state and the State Board of Education. So we were able to reduce that. The number of options available to students right now, I had one superintendent over in Glenrose that said, hey, I've got one young man that just simply wants to be a welder, but I've got him in physics and all these other classes that are preparing him for college. There are about 40% of our high school graduates in Texas that will go on to college of some sort, 2-year technical or 4-year. But we were cramming all 100% of our school kids into the college track and forcing them into areas that study things that they may not have wanted or had desired. So one of the other things that we did in the education meeting is step back and say, look, parents can provide that kind of counsel to their children, along with the professional counselors in the high schools, and decide what they want to be able to do. So instead of having 3 tracks, one being college track, a standard foundational track, which was the minimum standards, that if you took just the minimum standards as the law was when you walked into session, you would not qualify to go to a 4-year university in Texas. Now that has changed. We've made the minimum standard. You will qualify. You don't have to go. But there are other tracks or endorsements, whether it's business, public service, arts and fine arts, health services, business, STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. The students get to start making some choices, just like you do in the free market, of what are the areas of interest they would like to be able to do, so that you don't have, like Superintendent Rotan over in Glenrose, is, I got a kid that wants to be a welder. I have no options to give him any choices in that arena, but I've got to stick him into all the STEM courses because he's got to be ready to go to a 4-year university. And he may change his mind and be able to go to a 4-year later on. But instead of trying to cram every round peg into a square hole, we afford parents, school districts, and students the opportunity to make the kind of choices they want, and a greater range of choices as to the types of things that they'll study within school. Part of the special call that the governor placed upon us immediately after the regular session ended was on redistricting. I won't bore you with the Supreme Court's decision about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, Ben, wasn't it? The Supreme Court invalidated Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. Normally redistricting occurs under Section 2 and Section 5, but Section 4 is the section that enables Section 5. And so with Section 4 being invalidated, essentially Attorney General Abbott said, probably the next governor, yes sir, yes sir. Attorney General Abbott said we will now move forward with Texas's voter ID law because Section 5 had to do with pre-clearance of any changes in law for how you vote or qualify to vote in those states that the Voting Rights Act is applicable to. With Section 5 essentially being inoperable because Section 4 is invalidated, we'll be able to begin the process for the voter ID law to be implemented. We still have the Section 2 lawsuits that will continue to go on, but from the bottom line of where Ellis County is in redistricting, the maps do not change congressionally, state senate, or state house for Ellis County. You remain in Senate District 22, you remain in House District, State House District 10, and then it is U.S. House District 6. If I remember, Dan, yeah. I do not know how the Voting Rights Act invalidation of Section 4 affects county or city redistricting of the respective precincts, Jack. I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm not prepared to address individual county issues, but the state map issues. Let's talk transportation. This one is because of the major areas of Medicaid, education, water being added to that plate, but transportation, education, and Medicaid are the three areas of the state budget that are in the greatest need of attention. The overwhelming focus in the last decade has been education and Medicaid. From a transportation perspective, we have not had, with the gas tax, the dollars going into Fund 6, matching what we needed in the way of what's called preservation of our current roads. I mean, not building any new ones, but maintaining what you currently have and rehabilitating every decade or so what you have. Those dollars coming in to sustain the state of Texas's road system has not been enough. Those of you that are familiar with the transportation arena know that we have approximately $22 billion in bond debt that we have taken on since 2001 to be able to continue to maintain and build additional roads. Part of that is because we have not put money from general fund into roads, which is one of the reasons why you've seen toll roads and you see bond debt. It's also the reason why when you look at our gas tax, there's two taxes placed on gas. One's a state sales tax on gas, or gas tax from the state, gas tax from feds, both of which are approximately 20 cents. 5 cents of the state one goes to education. So we take 5 cents of every 20 cents in taxes with the state tax on gas, put it into education. So you've got 15 cents going to roads. At the federal level, we send 20 cents in. There's a pretty complicated formula of what we get back, but we are a net payer federally. What we send to Washington does not all come back. So out of that 40 cents, about 30 cents or so is what we are getting, whether it's from a federal tax, state tax combined. About 30 cents a gallon is what is coming into the state treasury to sustain our roads. In fact, let me draw the problem for you, if I may. And then after I do this and explain it, then I'll open up for questions and where'd Bill go? No, there he is. Again, please, Bill, keep me on time. I don't want to be discourteous to your next guest. Let me just draw the bar graph. This is cost / dollars, and this is time, and this is, just use a simple regression analysis. This is preservation. This is the cost. Let's just use 1990 as a baseline year. Let's just use 1990 as a baseline year. Cost of preservation of the roads in the state of Texas and what it takes in the way of income to maintain that preservation. Again, preservation is striping, potholes, and then rehabilitation is repaving, but all those together are preservation. Income from the gas tax is doing this, is relatively flat, whether it's because of gas mileage standards and the like. The amount of use on the roads is heavy compared to the ratio of gas taxes being brought in. Prior to, and I'll put on here, this is 2001 and 02, where the lines cross. Prior to that, since this was preservation, this capacity here was new roads. Meaning that we would, these dollars that are down here, we're spending on roads to preserve, maintain, stripe, rehabilitate, and the like. And then the money that we brought in above the gas tax, or the gas tax here, but above the cost of preservation, was for new capacity. Okay? In 2001, those lines crossed where the amount of dollars coming in was below what it took to preserve. And from the perspective of what it takes with the number of people coming into Texas and new roads, from the cost of additional capacity is right here. So what you see here in this delta between preservation and income and preservation and new roads, new capacity, this is what equals the $22 billion in bond debt or toll roads. And that's what happened in 2001 and why you saw toll roads become not the preferred method, but the only viable method for road increase in capacity. And that's the reason I voted against SB1, is because we went from restocking, restructuring the timeline when we did the budget last session and deferred the payment from August 31st to September 1st, which is the new fiscal year in the state of Texas. We backfilled that payment of $1.75 billion to education with the original budget proposal. But what ended up coming out of the final budget was about $3.9 billion in education. And that delta really needed to go here. There will be a constitutional amendment on the ballot, I believe. We voted on it in regular session, but couldn't get it passed in regular session. We voted on it in the first special, and the filibuster killed it. We voted on it Tuesday. The House is changing it. We'll have to go to conference or some sort of reconciliation between the two bodies. But there is a constitutional amendment that you would have to approve should we get that out of the legislature, that this November you would have to approve, that allows us to, instead of placing, and I can draw the tax on the wellhead, the severance tax. The severance tax that goes to general revenue, and then out of that general revenue is divided up between education and rainy day fund, and then what also goes to foundation school program as a baseline. We have about, had we not spent $2 billion out of the rainy day fund or allocated that for spending based on your vote in November for water, at the end of this fiscal year, there'll be about $12 billion in the Emergency Technology Fund, not Emergency Technology, the Economic Stabilization Fund. It's been a long night, folks. I've had almost no sleep, so I beg your deference here. So the proposal is take a portion of the dollars that would go to Economic Stabilization Fund that are putting so much of those dollars in there, is to have some of that go to Fund 6 to do two things. Pay down this debt and provide additional capacity. And the way the SJR or the constitutional amendment is written is it cannot be used for toll roads, and it cannot be used for TxDOT to go leverage more debt. One of the problems we've had with TxDOT is that when we have provided a cash payment of $1 billion, there was not a restrictive criteria on it that said, you may not take this $1 billion and go leverage it to take on $3 billion in debt. It'd be like me giving you, here's $1 billion, and if I say, hey, I'll go put this in the bank, make a deposit, get them to loan me $3 billion, using that as collateral, and then based upon what I'm getting. So part of this debt that was taken on up here is because we didn't have, starting in 2001, enough restrictive controls on TxDOT to make sure that they were not exceeding or adding to the state's debt problem, and we have to service this debt. Thus, part of the reason for that SJR. With that, I'll start taking.
I think you and I both are gonna go to our graves disagreeing on nullification, so I'm gonna talk about that.
We had a good 2-hour conversation over at the Sonic about it, so.
And I disagree with what, with 1730.
Don't understand it, and I don't like toll roads. But the dollars but I also don't want to raise taxes on your gas tax. But why don't I let you ask the question before I start answering it, because I'm
No, I'm just telling you.
yeah, I'm sorry.
But what I want to know about, and I think that the education area, I think we spend enough, and probably more than enough. We're not educating the children, we're throwing money at it.
Yeah.
And with that, I want to find out, I hear that Cisco is not as dead as they say it is.
Dan, have you heard that?
That'd be what was said. I mean,
Because I thought with Senator Patrick, that was one of the first hearings this session, and there was actually, that's news to me.
I hear it's not dead as they said it is.
The stake hadn't been put through the heart. Okay,
Right, and I'd like to find out more about that.
Could you provide Ben the source of what tells you that? Because I don't know where to chase that rabbit other than Senator Patrick.
Patrick's leaving.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, you took my pen, Bill.
I gave you a bad habit of that.
Yeah.
Well, don't you take mine.
Okay. I won't.
The superintendent in Red Oak says they're gonna continue to use it.
Yeah. What about Common Core?
Common Core is federal, which they're really both the same,
Yeah.
but that's federal. Texas said no to Common Core, but let the twin sister of Common Core come in with Cisco.
One of the areas that I would recommend to you to take a hard look at, and I don't mean let me just tell you, how many of you know who your State Board of Education member is? That's actually a pretty good show of hands. There are 15 across the state of Texas. And I'm not trying to give you a civics lesson, Harlan, because you don't need it. There are 31 state senators across the state of Texas. I represent about 805,000 folks. There are 15 State Board of Education members, meaning that it's 2.02 state senators worth of people in one State Board of Education member district.
1.6 million.
Yeah. So it's like 1.6, working to 1.7 million people. And the State Board of Education, we've had the past 2 sessions, this one and the previous, there have been encroachments upon their ability to set the frame that says in a public school, a charter school, and they also validate private school curriculum validators. They don't set the curriculum in private school, but they validate the entities that set the curriculum for private schools, so that whether you're in a private or public school, if you're a student in the state of Texas, here is the frame that it takes for you to say you're a graduate of a school in Texas and walk across the stage at 18 ready to be an adult before the law. find out who your folks are, invite them to come and talk. Most of the time, they don't even get invited to come to these kind of things. Your State Board of Education has a lot to say about much of this.
Elected.
And they are short of a statewide office holder. They have the largest sub-political divisions of the state, bigger than state senators that get them here to visit with them. About correctly, that's,
The left is stealing our country through our children.
I agree. Yeah, that's one of the reasons we tried to get the freedom of maneuver of school districts when it comes to testing and the like, because part of our problem, and you've been raising your hand, I'll get there in just a second, simplify. But part of the problem we've had in local elections is because culturally the last 60, 70 years, whether it's federal, state, have been so, magnanimous is not the right word, but controlling. You know that only about 3% of eligible voters actually will go vote in school board elections?
I didn't know it was that high.
Yeah. And so, and the thing is that most folks, it's like, there was last session, there was a bill I voted against. It was the binge drinking bill. I think I've told you this story, Carla. It was a bill that the state legislature was going to mandate a block of instruction that tells students not to binge drink. And my problem with that was, not that I'm for binge drinking, although I was accused of that in the Austin American Statesman, is that whose primary purpose is that? It's the parents. When we pass laws at the federal and the state level that really encourage parents to check out and not be engaged in their school boards, not be engaged in their city councils, that's your farm team for people that will go be your next state representative or your county judge or district attorneys, judicial positions of your district judges. All elections at all levels are exceedingly important. But we'll dig into it, and we'll find out from folks what the final disposition of C-scope was legislatively, and if that is incompatible with Ben. I'm making sure you're incompatible with what
And
you're
if it
telling
is dead, then I want to find out exactly that information and pass it on to Mr. Scott.
Yes, sir.
My question is multifold, but
I hope my answer is multifold.
actually, this is a continuation of I understand Steve's scope about yay much. I know my children go to charter school, high school. I know they do not use C-scope. But for those of us that are not really up on C-scope, could you give a thimbleful?
Sure.
And then from there, I'd like to dive into the federal tax issue a little bit on the gas tax.
Okay. C-scope was a twofold problem. The
It's
first,
thimbleful, please.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I know it's a complex.
Nothing a frag grenade couldn't solve, okay? So, no, despite what your mom told you, violence does solve some
I
problems.
agree.
That's what CPO Kyle said, is why.
Yeah.
I know. C-scope was a twofold problem. First was there were aspects of its curriculum that, why are we teaching that? The civil political disagreement on teaching that the Boston Tea Party was a terror act. Okay?
Let me ask the individual that says that.
Right, but right. So we're teaching what? So there was the technical or tactical aspect of what was being taught in the curriculum. And while that is a big problem, for me as a legislator, the bigger problem was you have the State Board of Education, which has the assets. Every 12 years, they review all the elements of current curriculum. So every 2 years, you'll have this 2 years they'll do history and history standards. 2 years later, they'll do science. 2 years later, they'll do literature and English.
On a 6-year cycle.
Right. So over a 12-year period, they'll go look every 2 years at a particular functionality of the basics of our education and bring up to standard what's changed in 12 years in history, what's changed in science, what's changed in, what are the most accurate, what are the most accurate things. And then, the State Board of Education has the assets and the teams to go do this research and analysis. Your local school boards do not.
I understand, it's
Okay.
outside their realm
Right.
of resources.
Right. So what happened was, you had the regional education districts, which are the support centers that the state operates to assist the school districts, develop C-scope,
Now you're making sense. Now I see where
the
it's
chain of
behind that.
command was violated, okay?
Now you're
That's
making
what,
sense.
okay? So the State Board of Education says, here's the standard for this, sends it directly to the ISD, and says, here's the standard for what you must test. Here are the textbooks that are required to do that. C-scope allowed the regional districts and the school districts to bypass State Board of Education review and avoid the standards that you as an elected official, because these are, you're elected officials, these guys are not, these guys were using what they were saying was instead of the direct chain of command.
Your source is your ISDs. Actually,
Right.
okay.
But they don't have this staff up here.
But
And it cuts you as the parent out because there were non-disclosure agreements that said you, not only could you, was your will as a voter violated by violating that chain, your will as a voter in your school board was violated because you weren't seeing this.
there's money, there's an enormous amount of money involved, in my understanding.
I can't get into
Because
that.
of the Texas.
It wouldn't surprise me, but
Always money.
Yeah.
But
All right, I
from
understand.
a command and control perspective, that was the biggest problem with C-scope was it was an abdication outside the bounds of the normal chain of the legislative process that you as the voter
It was
set.
hijacked. All right,
Yes, bingo.
let's continue, sir. Going back to the gas tax of 40 cents per gallon on every gallon of fuel sold in the state of Texas, and the state's only seeing 30 cents, say 30.
Yeah, that's just a rough
So
estimate.
that's two,
Well, the
that's,
state's seeing 35.
okay, that's
And
75
5 cents of that's going to education.
And you said Texas is a net, okay, that's fine. I'm talking about on net proceeds, net revenue. Every gallon of fuel, the state is collecting fuel, and Texas is a net payer, you said.
On the federal,
Yes, okay.
we send
Split
20
down
cents to Washington, we
get
get
15 back. We
18,
send 20 back.
15 cents back.
Where is the authority for that written, for Washington not to give back a state? Where does the feds derive their authority within the Constitution for them not to give back the federal funds,
To not give back?
Yes, sir.
Your
Where's
question? your
the
question-
robbery authority?
Well, your question's actually twofold. What's the constitutional authority? The the federal gas tax
Yes,
is for US highways and interstate highways
I see.
to be maintained. That tax is not levied for farmer markets, counties, or state roads.
Supposedly.
Well, in reality, in truth, that is the way it's done.
Well, the reason I say
Now,
that,
and so, because the US highways, remember, the US highways and the interstate highways transcend state boundaries.
I understand.
Therefore, you get to the interstate commerce clause that allows
Yes,
the federal government to collect the tax to maintain that system of
that infrastructure.
that infrastructure. Then, once you now have that constitutional authority, now the Congress has to decide, with all these dollars that come in, how do we formulate it, how do we make a formula for it to distribute it to the respective states? There's not a, you sent this much, you get this back, because even if we sent everything in, every state would have to share some burden of the Department of Transportation's.
I don't.
So there's some administrative overhead you're gonna
I'm with you.
But the small states, and this is where you get into the small states versus large states, and why the Senate, and I hope I'm not getting too much down the rabbit hole. But Vermont, Connecticut, New Hampshire, not just, New England because of their size, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, Hawaii, like the way the formula's written, because what they're paying in, they get about, for every dollar they pay in, they get about $2 back. And that means states like Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arizona, Nevada, states with big chunks of geography, lots of roads, lots of tax.
I got you.
And so the constitutionality is in the Commerce Clause because it is for both the interstate and the U.S. highways, which transcend state borders.
Okay.
Then the formulary or the implementation of that constitutional authority, and that's why it's so difficult for the states that are net payers. The net gainer states are going to, we like the way it is, so we're not going to vote for that. And that's why we.
Yeah, it's a national Robin Hood plan is what it amounts to.
Yeah. Because Connecticut is a densely populated state that's smaller than some counties of West Texas and has a lot of highway, and it has 3 electoral votes, similar population, just in New Mexico. New Mexico is, 12 times larger than the state of Connecticut? But they're paying and getting less in because they have more to sustain.
I use Wyoming as an example of what you're doing. The reason being, because of the vast expanse of Wyoming, the infrastructure, but the low population. Relatively speaking, the low population. You can drive forever and not see a whole lot of people in Wyoming.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Can we move on to another question?
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, I want to thank you for your strong support for the pro-life bill.
Yes, ma'am. I noticed that nobody Can I say something real quick? You, please, I want you to ask your question. Okay. When the Tea Party first started moving and there, all the castigation of, these people are just, they're violent extremists, and I don't see any jars of feces, and I do not see any bottles of urine in here. Thank you, guys. Thank you for being engaged and being civil
District 10, I do humbly repent of my state senator. We are working hard in Tarrant County to retire Wendy Davis.
Last night on the floor, Jane Nelson mentioned $100 million that had been allocated this session for women's health care.
Right.
Can you tell me where that money is going to go, what it will
I would have to, that's one I'll have to take for the record in the sense that where does it go? There are women's health providers, and we can have the discussion about, is it government's primary responsibility to provide health care to women?
Right, and that
Why don't, where are the men in this?
Nobody spoke up and said, this is not our job.
Yeah, well, but the key issue I would want you to take from that, because that's a bigger discussion, but when we, last session, we funded Planned Parenthood.
Right, was it going back to Planned?
No, there's not a, here's more money and we're now going to reinstitute dollars going to those entities that provide abortions. But to answer your question more specifically as to the additional dollar levels and where those go to, I'll have to. Ben, can you, Ben, you or Taylor?
I'm sorry, I was having a conversation back here.
Okay, Taylor.
That's my fault.
Yeah, would you take that as, and let's get, if you wouldn't mind, give Taylor your name and contact information so I can get you the answer back on that. So take it for the record. Yes, sir.
I've got a couple of questions on transportation and education. The Greer building that's in Austin has some people that get paid an awful lot for doing a very little bit, and they're funded by the governor.
And who is this, sir?
I don't know who, after the Board of Transportation people, it's in the Greer building in Austin, and I've done some work down there, and I was trying to find out what was going on, and a few of the comments were tongue in cheek that these guys are appointed by the governor and they get paid a lot of money and meet a couple times a year and do nothing.
It's the text I building.
Oh, okay.
I don't know his question, that's that Greer is with text dot secretary.
Oh, okay, okay.
And I'm not sure what they do or whatever. I just heard that comment. I said, man, this sounds like a lot of money for whatever. But anyway, second thing is, does it not cost more to build a toll road versus a standard freeway?
It depends, and it's really more the structure. The biggest reason, well, I've got to erase it already. The biggest reason you saw toll roads is it allows for the private sector to come in using their capital capacity, capital meaning borrowing power, that they gain that reimbursement of their cost through the collection of the tolls after the road bill. It's kind of like a tuition revenue bond or any other type of bond that you would see here, where somebody takes on debt, but that you're taking on the debt because I'm going to incur debt here, but I've got a projected amount of income that hasn't come in yet because those are in future years. It's kind of like when you take a mortgage out. Are you a good mortgage loan potential because you're borrowing the money out to pay for the house now, or to own the house now, but you've got to pay back those dollars over a period of time? I'd much rather pay cash for roads, so that it's a pay-as-you-go system to do that. But because the state has grown the way it has, and the dollars out of the three things that go to pay for roads in Fund 6 are the gas tax federal, gas tax state, license and registration fees. Those have not gone up in 30 years. I mean, it's been decades. And I don't think anybody in here said, we want the gas tax to go up. And so the challenge has been with an increasing need in preservation and new capacities of growth, and a slower increasing, if not flat, revenue stream. That's where you've got that cross between additional capacity prior to 01 and after 01, we're having to go into debt, and that's what we're trying to rectify.